I am jointly leading this work package with Liz Oughton, who will be presenting with me in this next 15 minutes. And this really follows on very nicely from what we were hearing earlier in work package 2. We heard of the bewildering array of different factors that you can use to evaluate these cropping systems. And of course, one of the things that was missing on that was the various social factors that people will inevitably use when they are evaluating cropping systems for their own use in their own farm system. And one of the key purposes of Work Package 3 is to engage with stakeholders at the study site level in order to understand what is important to them, and also to then try and start understanding the reasons why people adopt those new systems or not, as the case may be. So we have, I believe, yes, 3 research questions that we will be addressing in this work package. The first is asking the question, what social factors influence the adoption of soil improving innovations? I'm using the word innovations here in the broadest sense, that this may not be a new cropping system, but it may be new in this context, to this farmer, to this system. And there are many factors, as we've heard, but we're going to be looking in particular at the social factors. There is already a very good and established literature on the economics of this, and we understand that economics is, of course, an important factor that determines whether or not people will adopt these, and we've been discussing this already this morning. But there are many other factors that actually also determine their adoption preferences. So the social or cultural acceptability of this, or the way in which this might fit with the timings of their operations and things like that. The second of these 3 questions is about adoption and trying to understand how the dynamics of trust across space, time, social groups and culture and social learning explain how these innovations in cropping systems are perceived, socially accepted and then adopted by different stakeholders. So there are many factors that influence adoption, and we will be looking across all of these. There is very rich literature on this going back for many decades. But we think that some of the most interesting unanswered questions are about this thing that we call trust. Everyone talks about it, everyone knows intrinsically that trust is important for the ways in which people learn from each other and the ways in which new ideas, new approaches might spread from person to person and eventually get applied at a field level. But we know very little about how trust is formed and broken and reformed in these very different places. And I think by understanding that, that might unlock a huge amount of power for us as a group to be able to design interventions, processes, and social contexts in which we can enable these new ideas to achieve broader uptake. And then finally, how do the preferences, values and beliefs of different social groups and institutions interact to influence the adoption of soil improving innovations? Very often we think about the adoption decision at the level of an individual farmer. What we want to do here is to think about this in relation to their interactions with broader social groups and the institutions that determine how people think about and behave in relation to our work. Institutions may be formal institutions at a regional, national or European level, perhaps even linked to policy. But they may also be informal institutions. A group of farmers who meet regularly at a market, at a pub, and who have a set of social norms and rules that determine what they would deem to be acceptable or good crop management or good soil management. So, Liz, on to the methods.
On to the methods. Okay, so those are our overarching questions that we want to bring to the project and which we see as contributing to the uptake of these soil improvement methods, soil improvement cropping systems, So how are we going to do it? Well, as in all the other parts of the project, the first thing is that we're going to do the literature review. We'll be looking at both the published, the grey literature, and these contributory factors. And as we've just heard from Work Package 2, this is not just what we're generating, but it will also be very useful to get materials from you to say, have you seen this, have you noticed this? We're also going to be doing some telephone interviews with stakeholders in study sites as a background to preparing the workshops. Now, the detail of all of these we'll be talking about this afternoon, so I'm not going to go into any depth now, but just to sort of say that this is what's on the table here. I think one of the really interesting things is we've started to talk to people this morning about what's going on with these very close links that are across different work packages. We've already heard it from Work Package 1 and the gender input and how that will work through some of the practical work that we hope to be doing. It's important with Work Package 2 in feeding into the idea of what is improvement, what is a good soil, what's an improved soil, and so on. So a very important aspect of this, first of all, is the stakeholder analysis. And to start the process of selecting who these multi-stakeholder advisory boards are going to consist of. Who are these stakeholders that we wish to engage with? And we will look at the exercises that we want the advisory panels to follow. So this first 6 months is really about doing the stakeholder and getting going on this stakeholder analysis in collaboration with key members of the advisory panels. What do we mean by this? Why does it matter? Well, if we can see of our stakeholders and roughly put them down, say, what is their level of influence in these stakeholders as yet unidentified? What is their level of interest? And we can put this into a matrix, roughly speaking. I shouldn't say roughly, as it's Mark's matrix, but in this beautiful matrix. We can identify, for example, those of high influence and high level of interest. These are key players. Now, we must work closely with these key players. We've got those with high influence, but who may not be so interested, they're not really engaged at the moment, but because they're very influential, because they set the context of what we're doing, it's really important that we also contact them, engage with them, and have them working with us. The third group are those who are perhaps of very high interest, maybe individual farmers, but may have lack of power. Now, they can become influential, and they're a very important group, by actually forming groups together, of finding voice, of becoming empowered in certain ways. And it's absolutely vital that this group is an important part of what we're doing with the stakeholders. And finally, there are those of, let's say, the crowd, little interest, little influence. They may or may not be worth prioritising because, as we've already heard, there are so many questions, so many issues. We're going to have to bound these somewhere. They may or may not be important. But one of the very important things that Elaine brought up this morning is that we must be very conscious of gender in this, and what role gender and the relationships between men and women in these different stakeholder groups play. So our methods over what we might call the immediately social science that Mark was talking about will be developed through the workshops over the next year of training in the workshops, and then by the middle of year 2 we'll be ready to start implementing some of what we might call the key social science, to get at some of the issues that Mark talked about earlier on. What are the values that people hold? What are the ways in which the social meanings of these things? How do we look at the way in which these improvements might fit into their farming systems or the wider systems that are affecting their choices? So it's really about why should they take this up. We're talking about sustainability. If it's to be sustainable, it must be socially sustainable. And that's what we're interested in this part of the work. So how is this dynamic of trust and social sustainability built on? We've listed there a number of methods that we hope to employ. We will talk about those later, not now, but qualitative analysis, matrix ranking, a Q methodology, a way of really engaging and finding out about people's values, social network analysis, and visual anthropology and creative arts, because there's some very interesting movements between what we might call the arts and humanities and social science methods. Mark, back to you.
Great, so tomorrow you notice that there is some time set aside for training, and we're going to use this to first of all discuss with each other what we understand by stakeholders and participation, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And we're going to then actually do some stakeholder analysis. So you'll have a little guide, and we'll work you through this and give you some support. And one of the outcomes of this is going to be that I hope that for most study sites we'll begin to start identifying who ought to be on our multi-stakeholder advisory panels. Now you may have to finish that later, but you will make a start on that, and we'll make sure that everyone really understands how that works as a process. We'll look more broadly at impact planning. Once you understand who your stakeholders are, there's going to be a whole series of things that you're going to want to do in that initial stakeholder advisory panel meeting. And we're going to suggest to you a number of things that we would recommend that you do. And part of this is going to be about giving ownership to these people and trying to understand the kind of impacts that they want to achieve out of this project. Now, you can't do everything, but very often having that discussion at the beginning can give you that joint sense of ownership, so you move together towards shared goals. One of the activities you will be doing with that group, or perhaps with a selected number of that group, is to do a fuller stakeholder analysis. So this first one will be an initial one, just to work out who are the really important people who we need to make sure are really embedded in the project, who have that sense of joint ownership with us, who perhaps have the networks and contacts and resources to really facilitate us to achieve what we want. But of course, beyond that, there is a much broader group of stakeholders in the farming community, but more broadly, for example, in the advisory community, etc., who we will want to engage in some shape or form. And our own knowledge today may be, very often is, incomplete in terms of that larger stakeholder landscape. So what we will have at the end of today is a first attempt at this that can build our stakeholder advisory panels, and then with those guys you will do the full stakeholder analysis, which will be then reported on as part of this project and enable us to achieve that much broader impact from this work. The session tomorrow is going to be in two halves, and we're going to have one element of this on workshop design and one element of this on dissemination techniques, which will be led by Julie and Jane. In the workshop design, what we're going to be doing there is actually working through the shape of this workshop. We've kind of alluded to some of the methods that we'll be employing in this. We're not going to bamboozle you with lots of social science jargon, but we're going to start to talk through the kind of things that will be required. You will then be getting detailed guidance on each of these methods and exactly how to design these workshops, and there will be significant more support and training all the way through the project from us as a team to enable you to work with your teams locally to really effectively engage with your stakeholders to achieve the shared outcomes that we want for the project. So later this year you'll get lots more detail, as I was saying, on this. If you want to find out more from either Liz or I, come and talk to us at any point. We will be at each of the meetings as we are jointly managing this work package together, and these are our contact details if you want to email us. So thank you.